Welcome to part 5 of the new imperialism. Now we're going to talk about German unification. Austrian weakness also influenced the unification of the German states, right? You combine that with the threat of Napoleon III of France, and then you just throw in a great minister, and you have the recipe for unification. The German nationalists, of course, big problem, if you remember, was which Germany should we become? Remember, there was two major Germanic powers at this time. You had Prussia and Austria. And sentimentally, the Austrian Empire is the one that you would think you would side with because, well, historically, Austria is already an empire, and it's descended from the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is often referred to as the First German Reich, right? But the Austrian government is repressive, it's terribly inefficient, it was corrupt, and as you know by now, it was absolutely obsessed with its eastern problems. So with the defeat by Piedmont Sardinia in 1859, its damage to its prestige was enough that Prussia seemed like a more desirable way to go. And Prussia had numerous advantages. Its population was more homogeneous, it was more predominantly German, its government was very efficient. Its economy was strong in both agriculture and industry. Its army was the best in Europe. And finally, as of 1862, it had a very brilliant and powerful chancellor in Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck of Prussia is arguably the most significant European statesman of the 1800s. Bismarck believed that politics should be governed by practical considerations and realistic aims. This is more commonly referred to as realpolitik. Realpolitik's definition is it's a system of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological considerations. Right? Bismarck's aim was to ensure Prussia's supremacy over the German states, especially in the north. He's not looking, though, to unite them, right? He just wants dominion over them. Unification is more of an idea of the national liberals, right? Those nationalist groups, right? But Austria, of course, would not cooperate with this idea and would subtly try to undermine Prussia's influence in the German northern states. This led to Otto von Bismarck to begin to prepare for a showdown with the Austrians, right? He made an alliance with Russia. He favored Italy and France in disputes with Austria. And then finally, he's going to engineer 3 wars to demonstrate the Prussian state as the only state viable for protecting the interest of the German people. The first of these clashes was the Dano-Prussian War of 1864, right? This dispute began when the Danes tried to take over the independent region of Schleswig-Holstein, right? Now, both Prussia and Austria sent forces and very handily and quickly defeated the Danes. This led to a treaty called the Peace of Vienna of 1864, which gave Prussia and Austria joint responsibility for Schleswig-Holstein, right? But this, of course, created tensions between Prussia and Austria that would ultimately boil over in what becomes known as the Austro-Prussian War, which began in 1866, right? Bismarck used his disputes over the administration of Schleswig-Holstein as a pretext to send troops into Austrian Holstein. But really what was at stake here was who was going to lead Germany, right? At the end of 7 weeks, the Prussians' more efficient military had completely overwhelmed the Austrians, and this led to an 1866 treaty called the Peace of Prague. This was a relatively lenient treaty, but it established a confederation called the North German Confederation of 1867. This is a confederation of German states that is dominated by Prussia and excludes Austria. All right, so Otto von Bismarck has achieved his goal, right, to have dominion over these northern states, not necessarily unification. However, this did greatly alarm France. Napoleon III had supported Bismarck in hopes that the Austrians and Prussians would fight each other and literally destroy each other and completely fragment the German states. What happened instead was it created a powerful northern German confederation. And so, in order to retrieve his prestige, Napoleon began to demand territory from Otto von Bismarck in northern Germany. And failing that, he began to demand dominion over Belgium, right? Now, Bismarck now is going to realize that this French problem is not going to go away, and so he begins to prepare to fight the third of his wars, now against France. The Franco-Prussian War was Bismarck's masterpiece, right? Bismarck maneuvered France into isolation and then into declaring war. First, he discredited Napoleon III by informing both the southern German states and Britain about Napoleon's requests for German territory. And then he manufactured the pretext for war by proposing that the nephew of the King of Prussia, part of the Prussian royal house, as the new King of Spain. Spain was in need of a new king because there was a secession crisis, and the Spanish were in a revolution against the House of Bourbon, who was the monarchy in power there, right? Now, the French were appalled at the thought of having a Prussian ruler, a Prussian lineage ruler in Spain, thus having effectively German leadership on both their borders. And so when France diplomats attempted to get the King of Prussia to renounce his nephew for the throne, Bismarck edited the Prussian king's response, this is known as the Ems Dispatch, EMS, the Ems Dispatch, so that it was insulting to the French, right? So he edited the king's response. And then he sent copies of that response to French newspapers, and it got printed. And of course, the French people demanded war. And so France declares war on Prussia. Now, as usual, the Prussians have a more efficient government, the industrial might, a better trained army. They very quickly began to defeat the French forces. Napoleon III is defeated at Sedan. It's known as the Miracle of Sedan, and Napoleon III will be captured there. This effectively ends the Second Empire, right? The monarchy collapses. The war, though, drags on, right? Liberals and socialists are going to proclaim a new republic in France, a third republic. And initially, they're going to immediately seek peace, right? But Bismarck insists that France gives up the western province, west to Germany, the eastern province to France of Alsace-Lorraine, right? The French foreign minister was a guy by the name of Jules Favre, and he tried to argue that the days of passing land around like poker chips was over, right? But Bismarck insisted, and so the French resolved to continue to fight. Now, at this point, towards the end of 1870 and the beginning of 1871, the Germans began to completely dominate and occupy large portions of France. They had surrounded Paris and had laid siege to it by the beginning of 1871. So on January 28, 1871, the French finally signed an armistice, a ceasefire. And out of this, in May of 1871, you'll have the Peace of Frankfurt worked out. This is a very harsh treaty for France. It's going to breed a lot of humiliation and ill feeling that ultimately is going to lead to, wars in the future, right? That we'll talk about later. The fall of France itself weakened the new republic from its very inception. Matter of fact, in Paris itself in 1871, citizens of Paris are going to declare a commune, which is going to exist for about 2 months, a self-governing communist entity, right? Eventually, though, this commune will be put down through bloody street fighting. So in the end, Otto von Bismarck used the Franco-Prussian War as an argument that all Germans needed to be protected by a single German state, a German empire. So on January 18th, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the German states, minus Austria, of course, acknowledged the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, as Kaiser, as emperor of all the German people, right? Now, this event is going to change the balance of power in Europe forever, right? Europe is going to spend a century adjusting to this new reality, right? You got the unification of Germany that initiates a new era in Europe, a single state, rich and powerful in Central Europe, made more dangerous by the fact that you have an Austrian-Hungarian empire that was in chronic decay and decline, and an Ottoman empire further east that was growing weaker and weaker. Ultimately, the question will be asked, what is going to be the role of this new German state, right? the ethical and moral issues on this were never really addressed. Because remember, people like Cavour and Bismarck were operating under the considerations of realpolitik, right? Ultimately, though, Europe is going to have to ask itself, what are they going to do with this new colossus in Central Europe known as the Second Reich?